You know something's wrong when your boss's daughter-in-law starts explaining vendor velocity metrics at a finance meeting. We don't have vendor velocity metrics. Hell, most of us don't even know what that means. But there was Paige Ellsworth-Kane, fresh out of Northwestern with her MBA and her crocodile smile, talking like she'd invented corporate governance. I'm Warren Caldwell. Text to most folks. Been doing financial compliance at Pinnacle Industries for 15 years, ever since I got out of the Navy. Seen 3 restructures, 4 CFOs, and 1 CEO who literally had a panic attack during an earnings call. But nothing prepared me for Paige and her chunky pearls and her strategic activation ceremonies. They brought her in during a company-wide reorganization so chaotic that even the org chart looked like something a drunk person drew. Brad Kane, our CEO, stood there grinning like he'd just invented sliced bread. "This is Paige," he announced. "She's here to help us transform our operational framework." Nobody clapped. Not because we were rude, but because every person in that room had done the math and realized Paige shared the same last name as Brad's son. Nepotism starter pack, complete with a digital MBA and a podcast about authentic disruption. First week, she asked for audit log access. No chain of command, no request ticket, just a Slack message saying, "Hey Warren, can you send me the raw entries from Q4? I'm optimizing transparency," I replied with a GIF of a brick wall. She hearted it, thought I was kidding. Second week, she walked into our finance call uninvited and started asking about those vendor velocity metrics. When Derek Sullivan tried to explain we don't track those, she interrupted with, "We'll fix that in the next data sprint," then winked like she was sharing state secrets. Third week, I caught her making a call from one of the VP offices. She closed the blinds but forgot the door was cracked. I heard her say, "No, just rerouted through the shell company." Warren doesn't even know we paused the retro filings. She came out smiling, lipstick untouched, holding a lavender latte like nothing had happened. That's when I started keeping notes. 15 years in corporate compliance teaches you the same thing the Navy did. Trust, but verify. And when someone stops letting you verify, start documenting. I didn't call it evidence. Too obvious. Just a folder on my personal drive labeled operational concerns because calling it fraud file felt premature. At Pinnacle, paranoia isn't paranoia. It's professionalism with a backup drive. Paige moved fast. Too fast. Within a month, she had budget authority, her own Slack channel, a redesigned landing page featuring her as governance champion, and the ear of every guy in a blazer who thought diversity hire was a compliment. Meanwhile, I got uninvited from the acquisition planning meetings I'd helped build for 3 years. My calendar suddenly had holes in it. My approval request stalled in pending purgatory. When I flagged a suspicious vendor change, my request came back with a single-word comment from Paige, "Noted." It wasn't just me feeling it. Derek mentioned vendor records were off by decimal points. Nancy Hoffman from our logistics team got asked to reformat onboarding records from 3 years ago for optics. Our vendor verification process, tight as a drum since the 2014 audit scare, suddenly had gaps big enough to drive a yacht through. When I mentioned this to Paige in passing, she just laughed. "We're simplifying for speed, Tex. Don't worry, no one's going to believe you're the bad guy here." That was the first time she said it. "No one's going to believe you." Wasn't delivered with menace, just casual cruelty. The kind of line you toss out when you're confident the house always wins. I tried going through official channels. HR smiled sympathetically and said they were still adjusting to the new reporting structure. IT told me my permissions were under review due to restructuring. Legal gave me radio silence. Felt like I was being slowly erased by someone who knew exactly which strings to pull and who owned the scissors. But here's the thing about old dogs like me. We've seen this playbook before. Different players, same game. And if Paige thought I'd go quietly, she'd never read the fine print on a Navy veteran's approach to problem solving. The meeting invite came with a dancing cat gif and the subject line, "Coffee Chat." Nothing says we're about to ruin your career like a calendar request that winks at you. Set for 4:45 p.m. Classic corporate assassination hour. Late enough that everyone else had gone home, early enough that it wouldn't look deliberate. Paige greeted me like I was a guest on her lifestyle blog. "Warren, come in." Sit. I love that shirt. "You always dress like such a professional." It's inspiring. Her office smelled like rose water and ambition. Every surface covered with inspirational quote blocks and fake succulents. There was a framed print behind her desk that said, "Integrity is a vibe." I almost laughed. Almost. She offered me tea from a ceramic mug shaped like a unicorn's head. I declined. She took a dainty sip, then leaned back like she was auditioning for a perfume commercial. "So," she said sweetly, "I heard there was some confusion about the Hoffman vendor file." I didn't bother playing dumb. It wasn't confusion. The vendor contact listed is your sorority sister from undergraduate. You authorized a contract with her firm without declaring the relationship. That's a conflict of interest violation under Section 4, 2 of our compliance protocol. Her expression didn't change, just smiled at me like a snake. "Oh, honey, that's not how we frame things here anymore. We're operating under a trust-first model now. The old frameworks are, restrictive. Restrictive keeps us out of prison," I said flatly. She laughed, actually laughed. "God, you're intense." Then she tapped her nails against the desk. Click, click, click. "I never authorized anything improper. Maybe you misunderstood an internal communication. Happens all the time, especially with so much flux. But if it helps ease your mind, I'll look into it. You sent the file. You signed the change order." "Did I? I'm not sure that's accurate." "You could feel the air change. I have the timestamp trail." Paige set down her mug. Her voice got softer. "Warren, no one's going to believe you." Just like that. 5 words, cool as a breeze, delivered with the kind of casual cruelty that only someone born into consequence-free wealth can perfect. Everyone tensed up. She knew I'd gotten the message, and I had, loud and clear. I walked out of that office with every muscle in my body clenched like I'd been in a car crash. By the time I reached my desk, 3 of my team members' calendar invites had been updated. They were now reporting to a rotational manager Paige had personally appointed. 2 had already packed up. Said they had been encouraged to explore growth opportunities elsewhere. Derek looked at me with guilt heavy in his eyes and muttered, "They told us not to loop you in anymore." That same night, my access to the acquisition compliance folder was revoked. Just gone. No ticket, no warning. When I asked IT, they said the request came from upstream. When I pressed, they got quiet like they'd been told to shut up or risk their jobs. Knowing Paige, they probably had. The next day, I tried escalating through legal. My email bounced with a "not accepting outside submissions at this time" auto-reply. I wasn't outside. I was compliance. Or had been. That was the moment it clicked. This wasn't just a power grab. It was a systematic purge. And she'd planned it down to the dancing cat, GIFS. She thought I'd go quietly, tail between my legs, too paranoid to say anything, too professional to make a scene. She didn't count on the fact that Navy logistics specialists write everything down. Not just the what, but the how, the when, the tone of voice, the facial twitch when someone knows they've stepped in it. I didn't know exactly what she was hiding yet, but I knew one thing for sure: she wasn't just playing dirty. She was building a house of cards and trying to staple the foundation to my name. The first record I noticed missing was the conflict memo I'd logged after that vendor call. Nothing major, just a routine CYA entry, time-stamped, tagged, and uploaded to the compliance archive like I'd done 1,000 times before. Except now it didn't exist. The link returned a 404. The file name wasn't in search. The metadata was gone like it never existed. I tried pulling the backup copy from my restricted folder, the one only the director of compliance could access. Found it locked. Not deleted, not corrupted. Locked. And guess who now had admin override access? I checked the folder's change log. Entry 7421, revoked permissions, Warren C. Triggered by user P. Ellsworth Kane, elevated access via special projects. My hands went cold. I walked down to the analyst bullpen, hoping to find Derek. Saw him through the glass, noticed he immediately minimized whatever was on his screen when he spotted me. When I knocked lightly and stepped in, he gave me a look like I'd brought the plague with me. "Hey," I said, forcing casual. "You working on the Spencer vetting request? That was ours, right?" He nodded slowly, but didn't look at me. "I think Paige moved that one under vendor strategy." "You think?" He hesitated, then leaned forward, voice low. "She said you were on medical leave." I blinked. "I'm here." "I know, but she said you'd requested time off, that you were dealing with burnout and asked not to be looped in." I stood there silent as that lie settled like dust. That explained the frozen emails, the stalled tickets, the sideways glances in the hallway. Before I could ask anything else, Derek added under his breath, "Look, I don't know what's going on, but you should watch your back. Seriously." Back at my desk, I found my Outlook rules had been overwritten. Every alert from the acquisition group had been rerouted to an inactive subfolder labeled Legacy Loop, a folder I didn't create. Half my calendar entries were gone. Internal message threads scrubbed. Even the onboarding forms I'd signed for the new vendor coordinator were replaced with digital versions bearing Paige's signature. I checked the document history. Mine had been deleted 2 days ago. No timestamp, no explanation. I called legal. Melissa, our acquisition counsel, picked up with a chipper voice until I introduced myself. Warren, oh, hang on. Muffled static, a pause, then a sigh. I'm going to need to refer you to external relations. What? Why? There's been a personnel update. You've been removed from the merger oversight committee. Since when? Another pause. Since last Friday. Nobody told me. Yeah, she said a little too softly. That's kind of the point, isn't it? By the time I hung up, I couldn't feel my hands. Not from panic, but from rage. Deep, calculated rage. This wasn't incompetence. This was surgical. Piece by piece, I was being erased from the very work I'd spent years building. Paige wasn't just undermining my authority. She was rewriting history, creating a version of me that was burnt out, absent, legacy baggage. One day she'd point to the gaps and say, see, he wasn't looped in. He dropped the ball. And it would all be there, neat and hollow, exactly as she needed it to be. So I stopped playing defense. I went home that night, poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, and opened my old compliance drives. Then I backed everything up twice. Once to a flash drive, once to an encrypted drive I hadn't touched since the 2017 breach scare. I started making a map, not just of files but of intent, of lies, of strategic omissions and conveniently deleted records. Because if Paige wanted to ghost me from the system, she better pray I didn't haunt her right back. The folder wasn't pretty. No labels, no color-coded tabs, just a beat-up accordion file I kept buried behind old budget binders in my home office. Wedged between a broken hole punch and a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Auditor," a gag gift from my daughter Savannah last Christmas. I hadn't touched it in years. Last time I opened it, our head of risk had tried to sign off on a bonus payout to a board member's cousin for motivational speaking in a warehouse. That never happened. I called it my just-in-case folder. Just in case someone loses their damn mind and tries to pull a fast one under the guise of synergy. Inside were copies of flagged memos, snapshots of pre-audit data, vendor audit trails, expense anomalies, and a few printed emails I'd saved more out of instinct than intent. Every page reeked of toner and suspicion. The compliance version of a bug-out bag. I went hunting for 2 nights straight, combed through archived drives, old inbox exports, and 3 dusty flash drives from before we migrated to cloud storage. One of them had an Excel file from 2021 titled Q3 Vendor Escalation, Pending. There was a tab called Flagged, P. Ellsworth. My pulse kicked. She'd been involved in 2 vendor refresh cycles back when she was still consulting, before she married into the C-suite. Both were flagged for unusually fast approval chains. Nothing had stuck. We were too busy dealing with an embezzlement scare in logistics that year. Easy to miss, easy to bury. Then I found it, tucked inside a raw message export from a dormant email archive, marked with the subject line, Follow-up RE:vendor optimization. An email from Paige's private Gmail account. A private account sent at 2:12 a.m. addressed to one of the vendor liaisons she'd been pushing during the current acquisition. The body was short. No greeting, no sign-off. Just this. Clean the books on the Hoffman contracts. They'll never check the original vendor chain. Delete the retro PO entries and start fresh. We need clean optics for the closeout. You're covered. I stared at the screen for a long time. This wasn't just shady. It was a direct violation of federal acquisition law. The kind of thing that makes entire deals freeze in place. The kind of sentence a regulator reads once, then reads again slower. It had been sent the same week she locked me out of the files. While she was telling the board everything was under review, she was scrubbing trails with corporate bleach and ego. I printed it, old school, on heavy paper. Then I annotated the header, matched it to vendor approval logs, and traced the sequence of expense report ID numbers that had quietly disappeared from our system. This email was real, and Paige had been stupid enough to send it from a personal account, thinking no one in compliance would ever get access. People like her don't believe in paper trails. They believe in plausible deniability with a side of Pinterest quotes. That night, I started rebuilding my own timeline, not the one in our corporate systems. Those were compromised. I built a clean one offline on my own hardware. Cross-referenced approvals, digital sign-offs, ghosted staffers, Slack logs, and data archive timestamps. Everything that looked like coincidence, I flagged. Everything that looked like omission, I marked. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. You don't fire a shot like that in the dark. You wait, you aim. You wait until the exact moment when everyone's watching, when the illusion is at its peak, when they've bet everything on no one asking the one right question. By October, Paige was floating through the building like she'd already been named CEO of the merged entity. Her hair got blonder, her heels got higher, and her language got more nauseating. Collaboration is my love language, she chirped at one town hall. Governance is just another word for growth. I half expected her to release a scented candle line called Synergy. She'd started dressing in monochrome power suits, always with some kind of bright brooch. She took the head of M&A from the acquiring firm out to a spontaneous strategy brunch and came back beaming. Brad now referred to her as Paige the Closer. God help us. Meanwhile, she launched a video series on the intranet called Pinnacle 2.0, featuring herself walking dramatically through different parts of the office while spouting lines like, "We're not just evolving, we're transcending." Someone edited it into a TikTok with a laugh track and got fired within hours, but nobody dared challenge her in public. Every time a question came up about missing vendor records, shuffled payments, or sudden personnel drops, she spun it with a megawatt smile and a reference to provisional restructuring. And because she had the CEO's last name and a laminated badge that said Special Projects, Authorized Access, nobody pushed harder, except me. I quietly, patiently sat through every steering meeting, taking notes like a court stenographer. I listened to her improvised timelines. I watched her gloss over budget variances like they were typos. She dropped names of people she'd never worked with, quoted metrics that didn't exist, cited memos no one had ever seen. I made a list, a very, very long list. She didn't even notice I was there half the time. She assumed I'd been gutted with the reorg. In her mind, I was obsolete weight, something she could slap a sunset clause on and forget. She had no idea I was tracking every lie she told. Then came the moment I knew someone else was watching. I was leaving a budget prep session when Tucker Reynolds, our CFO, caught up to me in the hallway. Tucker's mid-50s, former audit partner, no patience for corporate BS. He adjusted his glasses and said, "You've been quiet lately." I shrugged. Lots of noise these days. He smiled thinly. "You still have access to the compliance vendor trail?" I nodded. He glanced around, lowered his voice. "Is everything as tight as it looks?" I didn't blink, just stared at him for a beat too long. Then I said, "Ask me that again during the final audit." He said nothing, just gave the smallest nod I've ever seen a man give, then walked away like nothing happened. That was the moment I knew someone else wasn't fully buying the show either. Maybe not willing to take sides yet, but not drinking the Kool-Aid. The first message came through my old encrypted Proton Mail inbox, one I hadn't used in years, back when we were investigating whistleblower protocols. Subject line, clarification request, 1806, filing discrepancy. The sender was a junior regulator with the Office of Transactional Oversight. I recognized the name from a compliance conference 2 years ago. Bright kid, asked too many questions, wore the same suit 3 days in a row. He opened with a disclaimer, "This is not an official inquiry. I'm reaching out on a personal point of curiosity about a flagged discrepancy I saw while reviewing supplemental materials from Pinnacle's pre-acquisition packet. Off the record, just looking for context. I read it twice, then deleted the draft reply I was writing. I wasn't about to put anything in writing that could get twisted into obstruction or whistleblowing without a formal channel. Instead, I sent back a single sentence. Final audit convenes Thursday at 9 a.m. 18th floor conference room. You'll want a front row seat." He didn't reply. Didn't need to. That same night, a second message came in. This one from Nancy Hoffman, who used to handle half our vendor-side freight contracts before Paige swooped in and cut her out mid-cycle. Her message was short. A screenshot, no greeting. Just this. Thought you should know. Below that was a cropped Slack message from Paige using her corporate handle. Go ahead and backdate them to July 15th. Label the files with original PO codes so optics stay consistent. You're protected under ops delegation. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't just sloppy. It was intentional. I wasn't the only one noticing anymore. That changed everything. The glass conference room smelled like anxiety covered up with citrus air freshener. Brad walked in first, all confident posture and practiced smile. Greeted the federal audit liaison with a warm handshake and the cadence of a man who'd once convinced a boardroom that a 13% loss was market rebalancing. He took the center seat, flanked by Paige on his right, his shiny new favorite, and our general counsel on his left. Paige was glowing. She wore a white blazer and carried a binder that looked thick enough to qualify as a blunt weapon. She walked in like she owned the place and sat down like the seat had been pre-warmed by destiny. I watched her open the binder to the first tab, marked with a peach-colored post-it that said Narrative Flow. Narrative Flow. Jesus Christ, I was 2 seats down. Quiet, neutral, unthreatening. I had no visible documents, just a laptop, a legal pad, and a pen I hadn't uncapped yet. If anyone had looked at me too long, they would have seen my pulse hammering in my neck. but no one looked at me. Not yet. The regulator, young, unassuming, dressed in gray with glasses too big for his face, sat across from Paige, flipping slowly through a hard copy of the acquisition documentation. He didn't speak for the first 10 minutes, just turned page after page with the precision of a man waiting for someone to lie in front of him. Paige led with her usual sparkle. We wanted to simplify the audit trail this year, so I personally reviewed and curated all relevant vendor documentation. We've taken a modern governance approach, digitally streamlined, but with key hard copy anchors for transparency. She actually said that. Curated, the regulator smiled faintly. Appreciate the clarity, he said without a hint of warmth. Let's start with the PO reconciliation sheets for Hoffman Logistics, Q3 and Q4. Paige's smile didn't waver. All included in tab 7, revised to reflect reporting optimization as of August 15th. He flipped to tab 7, paused, his brow creased just slightly. He flipped again, then slowly turned to face her. I'm seeing documentation for July and for October. Nothing between August 2nd and September 29th. Was there a pause in vendor engagement? Paige blinked. We underwent a re-benchmarking exercise during that window. Re-benchmarking? Yes, she said confidently. Internal realignment. The regulator nodded. And yet I have a flagged email here referencing backdated POS from mid-September. That would suggest transactions occurred within that window. Correct? Paige's hands moved under the table. Fidgeting, maybe. She forced a chuckle. You know how vendor timelines get when you're dealing with legacy systems. I'm not asking about timelines. I'm asking about documentation. Dead silence. Brad cleared his throat. A soft warning. Paige's eyes scanned her binder. Those files were consolidated. Part of our simplification effort. I'd be happy to. The regulator shut his binder. Everyone froze. He looked directly at Brad, then back at Paige. We're missing vendor documentation here, he said calmly. Specifically, the original PO chain for Hoffman Logistics and 2 other vendors flagged in the pre-review summary. Given the volume of those contracts, this constitutes a material gap. The whole mood shifted. Brad turned slightly in his chair. Paige? His tone was careful now. No more pride, just curiosity that had started to turn into caution. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I didn't move, didn't speak, just quietly reached down and slid a manila folder from my bag. My hand hovered over it. This was the moment. No fireworks, no shouting. Just a single action. A fork in the road. Because when someone asks the right question in the right room, you don't answer with opinion. You answer with proof. I thought about my pension. 2 years left until retirement. Thought about Savannah's tuition bill for next semester. Thought about 15 years of doing things the right way, only to watch someone rewrite the rules because Daddy owned the company. My hand was steady when I slid the folder forward. I didn't make a sound when I slid the folder forward. Just the soft whisper of paper on table and a little tap as it stopped in front of the regulator. The room didn't know what to do with that sound. Paige kept her smile intact, but it had the wobble of a party balloon left out in the sun too long. Her fingers twitched near her lap. She didn't reach for the folder. No one did except the regulator. He adjusted his glasses, opened the folder like it was a sacred text, and read the first page in total silence. No interruptions, no nervous coughing, just 10 seconds of absolute stillness. Then 5 more. The only sound in the room was the soft ticking of the wall clock above the coffee station. A tick that suddenly felt like a countdown. The regulator didn't look at me, didn't ask a question. Just read the email twice, once quickly, once painfully slow. Then he flipped the page, scanned the metadata printout, the matched PO codes, the cross-referenced vendor logs. The third page was the raw copy of Paige's private Gmail. Printed, dated, labeled with her exact words. Clean the books on the Hoffman contracts. They'll never check the original vendor chain. Delete the retro PO entries and start fresh. You're covered. Might as well have signed it with a bloody fingerprint. When he looked up, he didn't say a word to Paige. He looked directly at Brad. Is your counsel present? 6 words, no tone, no drama. But I swear I felt the temperature in the room drop 5 degrees. Brad blinked. I'm sorry? The regulator calmly closed his binder, stacking the email folder neatly on top. You may want to consult legal before we continue. This document constitutes a potential breach of federal acquisition due diligence standards. If substantiated, it would place your entire merger under provisional regulatory hold. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. That phrase, provisional regulatory hold, hit harder than any shouted accusation. Paige's face drained of color. The proud glint in her eyes gone. Her jaw tensed, then relaxed, then tensed again, like her body was short-circuiting, trying to keep up with what was happening. Brad slowly turned toward her. "Paige, what is he talking about?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally, she tried, there must be some mistake. "I don't know where that came from." The regulator opened the folder again. "This email originated from your personal Gmail account. The vendor on the receiving end provided matching timestamp verification. Your credentials were used to authorize the document modifications. Would you like to dispute authorship?" She stammered. That was an internal draft. "I didn't mean for it to be. You didn't think we'd check?" The regulator said, cutting her off for the first time. Still calm, still cold. Brad's eyes had gone glassy, not just confused. Betrayed, you could see it on his face. This wasn't a business scandal. It was a family imploding at the speed of truth. "Paige," he said again, slower this time, "did you alter vendor documentation?" She said nothing, didn't nod, didn't deny it, just stared at the folder like it might bite her. I sat back slightly in my chair. Didn't smile, didn't smirk. That wasn't the point. The point was clarity, the kind you can't delete, the kind that lives in toner and timestamps and black and white directives from people who think no one's watching. Around the table, everyone shifted. One of the merger liaisons leaned away from Paige like her chair was contagious. The general counsel closed her laptop without saying a word. And Tucker, good old Tucker, slowly slid his notepad to the side and laced his fingers together, eyes fixed on Paige like she was a puzzle he'd just solved too late. She looked down at her binder. The same one she'd strutted in with. The same one filled with curated lies, laminated bravado, and rearranged truths. It was worthless now, because one printed email had undone it all. And Paige, she had nothing left to curate but her own silence. By noon, the news had already hit Slack. Regulatory hold confirmed. Acquisition paused. Internal statement pending. No comment from execs. Paige escorted out. Some messages came with little emojis, wide eyes, explosions, one rogue clown face, but most were silent reads. The kind that sit heavy in chat logs because everyone knows this isn't office gossip. This is the thing people will whisper about in break rooms for the next decade. The kind of moment that fractures a timeline, before Paige, after Paige. They didn't march her out in handcuffs. This wasn't a movie, but she left surrounded by legal counsel and one guy from facilities who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Her white blazer was wrinkled, her eyes bloodshot. Her badge hung limply on its lanyard like even it had given up. She didn't look at anyone, not even the receptionist who stood frozen mid-coffee sip. Not even at me. They say Brad Jr., her husband, refused to make a statement. Last anyone saw of him, he was standing in the elevator lobby on the 22nd floor, staring out at the skyline, hands in his pockets like he was waiting for someone to tell him what part of his life was still intact. Brad Sr. stayed silent, canceled a press call, sent a 3-sentence internal memo that managed to say nothing while sounding vaguely apologetic. I heard legal drafted it. I also heard half the board is asking how far back Paige's projects go. But I wasn't in those meetings. I was at my desk where I'd been all along. Around 1:17 p.m., Tucker walked in. No entourage, no pretense, just him and a look on his face like he'd aged 5 years in a day. He stopped at the edge of my cubicle, cleared his throat. "Warren," he said, "I just wanted to say thank you. You didn't have to." I held up a hand. "Don't." He nodded once, not offended, just understanding that some things don't need to be unwrapped with bows and gratitude. Some things just need to be acknowledged. He left without another word. An hour later, my team's permissions were reinstated. Full access, vendor dashboards restored, email filters removed. Derek poked his head in sheepishly and said, "I found 4 memos that were, let's just say, parked. Want me to flag them?" I nodded. "Start fresh. Use the 2023 audit rubric. No shortcuts, got it." I opened a fresh binder, labeled the tab, Post-Disruption Integrity Controls. No drama, no smugness, just process, just policy, because that's what people like Paige never understood. They thought compliance was about red tape, about saying no, about slowing down the parade so someone could check if the float was licensed. But compliance? It's memory, institutional memory. The kind that doesn't forget who signed what. The kind that doesn't vanish when someone decides you're inconvenient. I didn't take a victory lap. Didn't post some cryptic inspirational quote. Didn't even call my daughter to tell her the story, though I probably will next time she's home from UT. I just opened the binder, turned to a blank page, and began writing. Because in the end, it wasn't my voice that brought Paige down. It was her own. Written, documented, dated, filed, and now archived forever. That night, I went home, poured myself a bourbon, and called Savannah at school. Told her I was proud of her for studying business ethics, even when her professors make it sound boring. Told her that sometimes the most important victories happen in conference rooms where nobody claps. She laughed and said, "Dad, you're getting philosophical in your old age." Maybe I am. But 15 years of watching people try to game the system teaches you something. The house doesn't always win. Sometimes if you're patient enough, if you document everything, if you wait for the right moment to speak up, the truth has a way of surfacing. 3 months later, the merger went through with a different acquiring company, one that actually did their due diligence. Tucker got promoted to chief operating officer. Derek's running my old compliance team now, doing a damn fine job of it. The new protocols we put in place after the Paige incident became the industry standard for vendor verification. Me, I'm still here. Still got 2 years until retirement. Still got my coffee mug that says world's okayest auditor. Still got that accordion file in my home office, though it's a lot thicker now. Because here's what I learned. Compliance isn't about being the fun police. It's about being the guy who remembers, the guy who writes things down, the guy who asks the uncomfortable questions when everyone else is too busy celebrating to notice the books don't add up. Paige thought she could erase me from the story. Turns out she just wrote herself out of it instead. And sometimes, in a world full of people trying to cut corners and move fast and break things, that's exactly how it should be.